Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm John Torres, engagement editor at Florida Today newspaper, and you're watching Florida Pulse. Today, I'm pleased to welcome back to the show two great reporters, writers, and podcasters, the Tallahassee boys, as I like to call them, James Call and John Kennedy, who cover the state capitol not just for the Tallahassee Democrat, but for 18 other newspapers in the USA Today Florida network. Welcome, guys. Thanks for being on the show.
Good to be here, John. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Today, we are going to be talking about the new Florida laws that go into effect July 1st, 2023, and how they will impact you, if at all. But before we get there, I just want to ask you guys for your sense of how the session went this year. Was this a productive session, or was it really just to pad our governor's resume for his presidential bid in 2024?
I'm Ron DeSantis, and I'm running for president to lead our great American comeback.
Well, it certainly had that. The governor, pretty much set the agenda for the Republican-controlled legislature this year, and that legislature followed exactly what he wanted on just about everything. So it really was a session that was a prelude to the governor launching his bid for the Republican presidential nomination. And it covered a lot of contentious subjects, a lot of LGBTQ community bashing in legislation involving gender-affirming care, access to restrooms, a number of different elements, a new 6-week prohibition on abortion, no abortions in Florida, most abortions outlawed in Florida after 6 weeks of pregnancy, and a number of other what we have colloquially started calling culture war issues. That seemed to be the dominant theme of this legislative session.
One could say that the Florida legislature was well disciplined. And what was surprising to me was the lack of Floridians, lack of public participation. And the governor wanted to run for president. The legislature made a deal with the governor that they give him everything that he wants, and they implemented, they imposed a radical agenda, and it became very transactional. That was the other surprising aspect of it. This is a very transactional group of politicians, and you can see it in many of the proposals that pass. The universal voucher plan being a prime example of it.
You mentioned, James, the lack of participation. I know that pre-COVID, we used to have lots of people from Brevard County head up to like Tallahassee to lobby to ask for things. Have the groups returned to their pre-COVID numbers, or not really?
No, I would say not really. I mean, if the polls are correct, a lot of the initiatives that were approved and sent to the governor are not popular with the people of Florida. But yet, despite the lack of abortion access to abortion, and the attack on the public school system, it was, I thought, a relatively quiet session concerning public protests and public participation. And to add to that, I mean, there was a very major, a very large election bill that was released the night before the committee meeting. And people had traveled all across the state to participate in that committee hearing, and they were only given 60 seconds to talk. And the proposal was released the night before, and the sponsor, Senator Burgess, said that the reason why it took so long that the Senate wanted to practice due diligence, but the public was only given a few hours to review this massive document and just 60 seconds to comment on it.
Well, if I can add to that, I think James does make a point there regarding some of the limitations that were put on public speaking at committee hearings this year. But I would dispute his version of how much the public participated in this session in this regard. I think this session was marked by a number of protests at the Capitol, and really trying to defy the legislation that the Republican legislature was advancing at Governor DeSantis's behest. There were massive protests on abortion. Some of even the civil lawsuit limits that were imposed on Floridians raising questions about people's access to the courts when it comes to accidents, injuries, insurance disputes. There were endless people crowding this Capitol trying to speak at hearings. But as James pointed out, in most cases, people were limited in the amount of time that they had. Sometimes, 60 seconds, after you drove here from Port St. Lucie or something like that. That's what you're given to sort of make your case. That's not much. But yeah, I think this was a pretty contentious legislative session. Perhaps maybe most noteworthy that the Florida Democratic Party chair, Nikki Fried, was arrested outside the Capitol during a protest over the new 6-week abortion law. So there was a lot of heat during this session. But
it may have been contentious. There may have been points of contention, and Nikki Fried and Senator Lauren Book's arrest, were dramatic and produced some nice photos and some nice cable news moments. But compared to previous sessions, compared to post Marjorie Stoneman Douglas massacre, the first year of Governor Rick Scott's tenure, when massive amounts of migrant workers, descended on the Capitol, I have the impression that the Florida public is rather apathetic. We have an extreme agenda being imposed, if the polls are correct, and the public is not participating in their government, and the legislature has become very transactional. More so than, or else I'm becoming more aware of how transactional Florida politics is.
Oh, great stuff there, guys. I was going to start with education, but I want to go to abortion for a second. So the new law that was passed, it makes it illegal to have an abortion after 6 weeks. But that's not going to take effect because the law that they passed last year is in the courts, right?
That's right. It's kind of a unique move by this legislature, and it shows just the drive within the Republican Party base for deeper restrictions to abortion. There was a law passed last year by this legislature that set the abortion standard at 15 weeks, that most abortions were outlawed after that period of pregnancy, 15 weeks. That has been it's in effect, but it has been challenged in court. And the Florida State Supreme Court is still expected to rule on the challenge. A lot of it is hinged on whether or not the 15-week standard violates the state's constitutional right to privacy, which historically has, limited the amount of restrictions that the legislature can impose on abortion rights in the state. Well, since the United States Supreme Court ruling last year in the Mississippi Dobbs case really upended the Roe versus Wade, the historical precedent for constitutional access to abortion, it has given authority to states to more strictly regulate abortion. So the legislature right now has passed a 6-week standard that will go into effect if the 15-week standard is upheld. Because basically hinged on that 15-week standard being upheld would be the idea that the state Supreme Court would reverse what it has ruled going back to 1989, that the state's constitutional right to privacy prohibits the state from really enacting strict limits on abortion. So if that 15-week standard is upheld, forget about 15 weeks, you're going to go right to 6 weeks, basically. So that is still pending in the state Supreme Court.
I'm assuming, though, that somebody could then challenge the 6-week, and then we'd have the 15-week in place, right?
Yeah. There's a little bit of that. There's a lot of who's on first, I think, when it comes to what happens here. So we'll see. A lot of this is still going to be rolled out. But for now, 15 weeks is the law in Florida.
Gotcha. James, I'd like to start with you with education. There's quite a few bills that had to do with education, from public safety, rooms or places that are safe, to a TikTok ban. What struck you most about the the emphasis on education this year?
The most dramatic is the universal school voucher plan. All Florida students are eligible for what will amount to about $8,000 voucher to go to a private school or to charter schools. It's the biggest school voucher program in the nation, and that's very significant. And there's at least 8 other bills that will be felt, starting with later start times for middle and high school students, term limits for school board members. You mentioned the ban on TikTok and other platforms of countries of concern. I mean, it's not just TikTok. It's also platforms that have ties to the Russia, Syria, Iran, North Korea, countries of concern. The TikTok ban, the bathroom ban. You have to use the bathroom of the sex that you were assigned at birth. Students and staff members do not have to refer to someone by a pronoun other than their sex. This is all part of the governor's fight against transgenderism in society. That includes, a ban on gender-affirming care. There's a school bus video bill. School buses can be equipped with video cameras to catch drivers who do not stop when a school bus has its stop sign out. So it was a pretty extensive list of bills for education, I believe. Education was definitely a priority of the Florida legislature, one has to say.
Right, gotcha. And John, you hit earlier about the attack, if you will, on the LGBTQ community. We saw an expansion of the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill, right? It's parental rights and education bill that passed last year. Can you talk a little bit about what changes we should expect and what effect is that going to have?
Yeah, that's another measure that is likely going to cause some stricter limits in school as far as the exchange of ideas when it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity. That in the legislation passed last year prohibited such discussions from kindergarten through 3rd grade. This year, they have expanded it through 8th grade and through 12th grade, where it's only considered age appropriate. So really, it's one of those kind of things that I think in practical effect, when it comes to how it's going to be handled in the classroom, I think teachers are just going to try to steer clear of the topic of sexual identity and gender identity, sexual orientation and gender identity. It's hard to understand just how teachers are going to navigate this. Undoubtedly, these discussions are going to come up because children of this age are very aware of these things. But the Republican-controlled legislature does not want these discussions taking place in a classroom. They believe that this is something that extends to parental rights, and that only parents should be speaking to their students about these things, even though, as we know, and from much testimony that we've heard in committees during this legislative session, a lot of times students will turn to a teacher rather than a parent when it comes to some of these sensitive subjects. And but anyway, it's going to cause, I think, a lot more, kind of chaos and mayhem in the classroom, and teachers being very, very cautious about what they feel entitled to say.
And
I'm sorry, James.
That we neglected to mention the prohibition on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the ban on that. I mean, that most of the time that discussion was with higher education, but it also applies to the public school system, and and follows up on the previous year prohibition on critical race theory teaching.
Now, I've read that some teachers are fearful of being arrested or charged or something else. Is that realistic? Is that a viable option for somebody who is not going to obey this new law?
Well, I don't think criminal arrest is something contemplated, but Yeah, I mean, there could be clearly disciplinary actions against the teacher, I suppose, from the school district, and the possibility, I guess, of lawsuits, litigation. That's another chilling effect when it comes to what kind of discussions are going to go on in classrooms.
And now, when they're talking about a TikTok, like actual ban or some other apps, is this a case of just asking all these students for their phones as they walk into the school building, or how are they going to enforce something like this, or can they just just control it on their Wi-Fi? What apps are allowed and on like school grounds?
Yeah. Basically, I mean, you can put up sort of like an electronic fence, an electronic barrier, and I mean, I'm not well versed on the technology of this, but you're able to prohibit. I mean, have that type of blockage on your Wi-Fi to prevent those applications from being downloaded or accessed through your system.
Yeah, I think that's primarily how it's going to be enforced. At least that seems to be how it's anticipated to be enforced. That the school's Wi-Fi network would not allow students to access, which raises the question about students can just turn off the school Wi-Fi and access it. So there is that. I don't know if this is really going to completely obliterate TikTok use when it comes to K through 12.
Right. And then another law that has gotten a lot of buzz is that one about permitless carry. It sounds like it just got a lot easier to get a gun here in Florida. Is that the case?
Well, in a sense, it creates a loophole for getting a gun. You're able to, if you believe you don't have to have a permit to carry a gun in public. And there you go. That can create all kinds of mischief.
And if I'm reading this properly, it also means that you don't have to wait 3 days if you're buying a gun from your neighbor, let's say, and you don't have to go through
that would
training.
be a private transaction between two citizens, and that's the loophole it creates. So you may not be. Well, it's a circular argument, So I was going to say you may not be eligible to carry for a permit for a gun license, for a gun permit to carry a gun, right? So you're not eligible for that, and the law says if you are eligible, you can carry a gun without a permit. But then opponents point out, well, that you're making it possible for people who should not have a gun to carry a gun because they can get a gun through a private transaction with their neighbor. And people and the supporters would say, well, people who break laws don't follow the laws anyways, so why should a law-abiding citizen be penalized? And so we just go into a circular argument with that. But the bottom line is, you can carry a gun in public without a permit, and you can be and you can have a gun without a license. And
and so just to be clear, we're not talking about open carry, right? We're not talking about holsters on the side of, like people at the restaurant. And this is
right. That is not allowed yet in Florida, and that was a dispute within this legislation because there was a cohort within the Second Amendment advocates, the people that are pro-gun rights, that wanted open carry to be included in this. But the governor did not go there, and he caught some heat from supporters on the right from that because the state is not allowing open carry. But it seemed as if the law enforcement agencies did not want to see the state go that far. They were okay with permitless carry. They seem to think that is not going to increase the crime that we keep hearing about in the state of Florida. But they did seem to draw the line at open carry, that could be a confusion, I guess, at the very least, to law enforcement.
And I'm curious,
I'm
sorry, James, go ahead.
Before, you would have to get training to get a permit to carry a gun, and it could take 90 days for the license to be processed before you could get your permit to carry a gun. Now that is all gone. It's automatic.
Wow. Another issue, obviously, that is huge in the country and in Florida is that of immigration. And we know that our governor has shipped immigrants off to quote unquote woke states or cities to send the immigrants that are here that crossed over illegally. Can you tell me what this new bill is, and also if it has a sort of human trafficking element to this?
Well, this is another measure that's considered the strictest in the nation, enacted by any state, and it really its underlying provision requires businesses to check the federal database E-Verify for any new hires that they conduct. So that is considered to be something of a obstacle for undocumented migrants from getting work, getting jobs in the state of Florida. The Florida employers, especially in the areas of agriculture, landscape nurseries, restaurants, the tourist industry, and construction, have kind of relied on a system where they get documentation from employees when they hire them, but they don't really have to check the veracity of that documentation. So there's a lot of phony documents going around the state of Florida, and that's the way a lot of these industries have hired workers, because there are a lot, roughly almost 800,000 believed in Florida, undocumented aliens. So a lot of them work in these key industries in the state. And this is going to, disrupt that going forward. A lot of the across migrant communities right now, we've written about how there is an exodus going on, where a lot of undocumented workers are leaving this state, and it's raising problems for construction industry, for the agriculture industry, and for restaurants around the state, because they're losing all the people that they relied on. So that's an issue that is kicking in July 1st. That law takes effect, and we're going to see it probably amplify, especially as the agriculture harvest season starts coming to Florida in the fall. There is a human trafficking element to this, where bringing people into the state is going to be stricter penalties on this. And it has raised questions about whether, what's considered human trafficking could wind up being a migrant bringing undocumented family members into the state, just a carload of people, because the standard is about 5 people or more in a car. So there's going to be some issues when it comes to enforcement, and there's going to be a lot of concern within the immigrant community in the state about whether they want to stay or not. And at the same time, you have employers around the state that now are going to be struggling to find workers, especially at a time when unemployment generally is very low, and it's hard generally to get workers right now. So a lot of things still going to be unspooled from this new immigrant crackdown that Governor DeSantis wanted, and which he is certainly amplifying as he runs for the presidential nomination on the Republican side.
And I assume that many of the big agricultural firms in the state were opposed to this, correct?
They were silent. I think this is something that DeSantis has created an aura of fear, that no industries in Florida want to defy the governor in his wishes. So they kept quiet about it. They're talking a little bit to us on background, off the record, but nobody wants to really go public with it. It's very hard in a story like this that myself and another reporter worked on this past week, looking at the exodus, as we described it, of migrant workers. It's hard to talk to undocumented workers for a story like this, because they don't want to be publicly quoted, because they're kind of saying, I'm undocumented. And then when it comes to employers, they're all afraid of Ron DeSantis, so they don't want to really go on the record either. So it's a contentious issue to kind of cover, but it is real, and it's going on.
with a well-disciplined legislature.
Yes, exactly. And with
the governor casts a big shadow. I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
no, that's fine. One employer that obviously has butted heads with DeSantis is Disney. Where do we stand on that? The whole Reedy Creek thing, and they're going back and forth, and with like lawsuits. As of today, where do we stand?
Well, we're still in court, as I understand it. The new board there's the new board that the governor has created, and they are negotiating contracts and passing resolutions and procedures. But as with much of the Ron DeSantis agenda, it's to be determined in the court system.
And is he sort of hedging his bets a little bit with some new legislation that allows him to stay in his role as governor while he runs for the presidency? And also, wasn't there some legislation passed about how he doesn't have to divulge his travel expenses?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, so it's harder to keep track of where the governor's traveling and how he's traveling with his schedule. And there's been the legislature has acquiesced to his request to provide more bureaucratic cover for that. And but you're saying, is he hedging his bets? I don't think it's so much as that. I think he's in a situation where he has stepped onto the national stage. He's looking to move up. And if things don't work out well for him in the Republican primary, he's going to come back to Tallahassee for the next legislative session, the next two legislative sessions, as the lamest of lame ducks. Members of the cabinet are circulating or circling and hinting that they have plans on running to be governor. I mean, there's a rumor about Jimmy Petronis over the weekend. You can see, I see a couple Democrats, making moves. So I don't know if it was a gamble or hedging his bets. Ron DeSantis took a big gamble in announcing his candidacy for the presidency with 2 years left on his term, because if he comes back to Tallahassee as a defeated candidate, I don't think his ability to control the Florida legislature, as it has been for the past 2 years, will continue. What do you think, John?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, James. He is really in a situation where we have the early primary states will be at their hottest next January, thereabouts. And that's when the legislature is going to be holding the 2024 legislative session. So the governor is going to be kind of absent during a lot of the 2024 session. And that's where I think you will start seeing various people that are looking to succeed him start to, flex their muscles in a way. You mentioned Petronis, the CFO. There's Wilton Simpson, who's the state's agriculture commissioner, and Attorney General Ashley Moody. Those seem to be the, most evident likely Republicans to try to succeed DeSantis. So it's kind of hard to tell, but you'll start seeing some movement by these people in some way or another, and getting allies to come to their side in a way. I think you will not see the kind of command that Ron DeSantis had over the legislature this year, next year.
And since an opposite center of power has not been created in the Florida legislature. I haven't talked to former Senator Jeff Brandes in a couple months, but he's out there doing some very interesting things, and he's always been a maverick. So, people who have their eyes on the governor's mansion in Tallahassee, Ron DeSantis leaves town and goes out to the cornfields of Iowa and the snow banks of New Hampshire. People are going to move into that power vacuum here in the capital city. And at least with someone like Jeff Brandes, you're going to have people offering an alternative to the agenda that Ron DeSantis is pushing.
Great. Well, as always, guys, I really appreciate all of your information. James Call, John Kennedy, they're all over Tallahassee politics, not only for the Tallahassee Democrat, but for 18 newspapers in the USA Today Florida network. You can also listen to them on their podcast, Inside Florida Politics. Guys, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's always fun. Anytime.
Great. Take care.